everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Read, Write, Think, and Code with Sharon and Renee. And today we are thrilled to dig into this wonderful conversation around assessment. I know we get a little bit like when we say the word assessment, but we want to talk about how we can debunk that conversation and think about how we're actually really applying computational thinking and using patterns to help us fulfill our teaching and help our students move forward. So we're going to dig in and talk a little bit about how we can use patterns to help formulate how we're teaching, how we can use it to drive content and lessons, and then really at the ultimate end, how does that help our students learn better? And especially in the environment that we're in right now with the virtual spin. Changes things a little bit. So, Renee, assessments. What's your first thought on assessments? I tend to be like,
I do hear the record needle going across. That's exactly what I'm hearing. And maybe one thing to think about is my good friend Gravity Goldberg and I have been thinking about this a lot in some of the work and support that we've been doing. And this has helped me shift my thinking. If we think of what would happen if we thought of assessment as a mindset versus assessment as an event. And sometimes when assessment is an event, it does feel more like an evaluation or a test. And that kind of comes at the end of learning to reflect, a little bit about like, well, me as the teacher, like, did I achieve my goal of supporting students in learning this? And then as the learner, was I able to take it in? How did I grow or change? And so it is interesting to think about our mindset and how do we position assessment versus if we think about if we move away from, and I'm not saying that testing is wrong or we do need to have accountability, but if that's the only version, which is perhaps why I hear the needle scratch across the record,
right.
It feels like it's limited. But if I shift into more of having a mindset or a stance of assessing, like right now, I'm assessing you and I on the screen. I see you nodding and smiling. And the idea of just assessment as a stance is kind of taking in information and what am I allowing the world around me to teach me? So in terms of students, what am I allowing students to teach me, right? I really do think about students are teaching me things about them.
Right. And that's so important because we feed off of their energy or non-energy, in particular when we're, I think about this so often when I taught high school for so many years and, I may try something in first period and I could feel the energy being like, maybe not so exciting. Now, that also could just because it's first period, but I would tend to shift the way in which I was going to deliver my message based on the energy that I felt from the students. And that is a form of assessment.
100%. And in that scenario, that example, you were being incredibly responsive to the information that you gained, right, from probably a couple of sources. And that is a big buzzword right now in the field of education, right? How are we becoming responsive teachers? And I've been thinking a lot, again, about supporting and shifting in my own work, the idea of rather than outsourcing my teaching, I really want to insource it. And what I mean by outsourcing my teaching is someone, distanced from the children that I'm teaching is making my teaching decisions. And I think, how can that possibly support the students that I know their names, their faces, their quirkiness, their brilliance. Right. And so I really want to try to shift away from outsourcing my teaching to insourcing, right? And really truly becoming a responsive teacher and using that assessment as a stance, right? Allowing kids to show me what they know. And that's going to drive my teaching decisions. So thinking about student-centered curriculum rather than just covering curriculum, right? If my curriculum is outsourced, somebody's handing it to me, I feel like I'm just kind of covering it, kind of checking the boxes and kind of moving along. Right. Where if I'm designing it and I have what John Hattie calls success criteria, right? I kind of know these are the 2 or 3 goals that I want to achieve in this. This is my teaching focus. Then I'm going to take all the information, and that alone really kind of helps me think, all right, in this next study that I'm conducting, these are the 2 big goals I want to reach. So what can I take in? What information can I gather from students that will help me respond and design curriculum and be that's responsive to the students in where and what I'm teaching. So I see it as opportunities to support students rather than the deficit model of, kids can't. Let me remind us, we all can't, right? When we're doing something new, when we learn something new, it's part of the process. Yeah. So kind of just even that, just shifting of where can I build on students' strengths, what kids can do, and where are there opportunities for me to support that is a really different shift, right? An asset-based approach to designing curriculum versus a deficit-based approach. Nobody really likes to be reminded of what we can't do. And so when you and I—
Yeah, I know. And I like that the way you just said that about not being reminded about what we can't do instead of about what we can do, and know that we may make mistakes along the way to figure out what it is that we can do.
And 100% a part of the learning process. And it feels like if we're presenting learning in any other way, it's fake, right? It's like a false sense of learning.
Yeah.
The learning process really is, and even that growth mindset is seeing an opportunity in our setbacks, right? When things don't go our way. And so modeling that for kids.
Yeah, I like that. And, there's 2 points that you brought up that I think are really important to revisit here. One is that you've really honed in on that concept of mindset and how we think about that in terms of an act, and the assessment is mindset versus doing the action. That is really important to talk about. And the responsiveness is not so much about what others are telling us. It's about how we as the educator can internally see something that's occurring and switch and move and reevaluate how we're delivering our content or discussing our content.
Yes. And I'm even thinking through hearing that. So like, what are some of the puzzle pieces, so to speak, to kind of help you do that? One is, again, having a clear teaching focus, right? This is what I am hoping to do, that success criteria. And then the second is looking for opportunities to support what students are already doing. And that's where I think the pattern matching, when I hear you talk about computational thinking, I think about not only in my own reading and writing work, but even in my teaching work, right? What I'm doing every day is I'm looking for the strengths in order to leverage those strengths. And so I'm looking for identifying those, what students are doing well, and technically patterns, right? I think that's what I'm doing. I'm looking for patterns. And then how can I leverage those in a couple of ways, and giving my feedback, right? So a lot of times I'm watching the process students use. How are they going through something? How are they picking books? How are they decoding the text? How are they taking pen to paper? So I'm looking for the process as an opportunity to learn about what they're doing. And I'm also looking for thinking patterns, literally the patterns in their thinking. Do they tend to envision a lot when they read? Are they drawn to character and ideas? Are they inquisitive in their reading? Do they ask a lot of questions? Are they filled with a lot of emotion? Do they react? So I'm looking for their thinking patterns to analyze those. So those are 2 places where I'm intentional in gathering information and looking at what happens when I put that together. Like when I look at their patterns in process, or I look at their patterns in their thinking, and I try to name that for students. So giving kids feedback is really also a way to use your assessment to teach. So just mirror it. My friend Gravity talks about being a mirror, just like mirror. If you think about the role of a mirror, you just mirror that back to students. That's essentially teaching. Here's the process you're using to be successful in choosing books. Let me say it back to you. Or here's the process you're using to think about characters. Let me say it back to you. And that's a way I think we can be responsive to what students are already doing, and name their strengths and use those strengths to leverage into areas where they might be nudging towards, right? And keeping that in that, we use this term a lot, right? That zone of proximal development that Vygotsky talked about, that ZPD, right? And so when we leverage a strength, it helps us nudge towards, okay, so now we're thinking about one character. What would happen if we brought 2 characters? Right? We did that same work, that same pattern that you thought about one character. And now I'm going to teach you how to link it to 2 patterns and start to look at their relationship between characters. And I find that when we do this in our teaching is more targeted. and responsive to what students need, rather than reaching out for that, lesson that somebody handed to us and might not be exactly what students need. And the teaching transfers. We see it transfer a lot faster to students' independent work because it's closer to their zone, what they're already working through.
Right.
So if you can imagine, bit by bit, we keep using what students are doing to nudge them closer and closer into areas, that are opportunities to teach them to do. You can imagine the success that both we, the teacher, feel, right? Because our teaching is targeted, but also the learner feels like it's manageable. We're bringing it into what they're already doing. And so it's very different. That's a very different view of assessment, right? Because I don't see it as a test or a checklist, again, or an event. Accountability is really important. So I'm just going to say that again, but it's not necessarily what's going to drive my day-to-day teaching. A lot of times we say, well, like, okay, I taught that thing. Now what? What do I teach next? I don't know. But I think students actually give us the curriculum that we can design, just if we sit and watch and listen to them.
Right. And there's a couple of pieces that you mentioned too, that in terms of thinking about this as a computational thinking process, you mentioned the first piece is we want to think about, there's 4 parts of computational thinking where we decompose, pattern match, abstract, and then we come up with the algorithm. And we're doing this so quickly every day in our everyday life. But when we're working with students, the first piece we want to think about is we're teaching or we're thinking about a new concept, or we're working with them on a new learning metric. That's our problem, right? Here's the thing that we want them to know. And we begin to start breaking down how we want them to know it, right? That pattern matching is so important. And I'm thinking about this through the virtual interaction that we're having on a regular basis with students, because I'm even noticing patterns with my own children when I watch them interact virtually with how the Zoom call is set up, how they're interacting in a small group versus how they're interacting with a large group. How are they paying attention? What are they doing, right? That is extremely important. And that data collection is also, at the core, the heart of computer science, but understanding how to take that data and process it. And because most of it is qualitative, we're observing it versus quantitatively writing it down. And that's where I believe that disconnect between what you were saying in terms of a mindset versus an event. When we normally think about assessment, we're thinking about the quantitative multiple choice question, right, wrong, that kind of piece. And we know in education, that's just pretty much a moot point, because so much of what happens in the relationship building that we have between students. But you also mentioned that as you were watching your students and you're observing, and you're becoming that true facilitator of their education when you're giving them content and then watching them and how they interact with it and work. So that's the abstraction part, where we take out pieces that we don't need or things that are not meshing well with how the kids are learning. And then that's when we come up with that algorithm. So I'm even thinking too, that if you are an educator that's had lessons given to you, and that happens very often in our system, where we, districts adopt a new curriculum and you're given X, Y, or Z to use that as a guideline. Use it as a guideline. We're not saying throw that to the wind. Use that content, but really get to know your students and watch how they're interacting, because that assessment will lead you to higher assessments or higher scores when you finally do get to the end and we have to do that quantitative work. So that whole process, then you can replicate over and over again based on the content that you are teaching.
And I think this could be a whole other episode, but let me say it here and we can cut it or to keep it in. But I think as I'm understanding the 4 parts of computational thinking, it's helping me think about that from assessment to teach, right? And being that, the algorithm for being a responsive teaching, right? So a responsive teacher and letting students drive our curriculum decisions. Because when I am pattern matching, right? When I am watching them, I'm observing from either what I see or what I hear. I am starting to think about okay, what is this information teaching me?
Right.
And then even if I do have a curriculum guide given to me, what I think the algorithm piece, but tell me if I'm wrong, is like my sticky notes, right? Like thinking about how do I take a skill and break it into strategies. So a skill is kind of the
Yes.
bigger goal we're after. And then I need to, if I just summarize that, I'm telling it rather than teaching it. Okay, go ahead and envision. Good luck, like I feel
Right.
like the algorithm is more of like, what's the step by step, I think, that I
Yeah.
can model in my own
Mhm.
thinking. So how do
Mhm.
I model envisioning might be like, okay, what do I see, what do I hear, what do I smell, what do I taste, what I think? So it's that step by step that we're putting together to help achieve the
Yep.
goal of envisioning. And I can only really get there. I mean, envisioning is a pretty good skill to teach, right? Because if you envision well, you can analyze character. But I can get there by, again, observing students and thinking about, or even that extraction piece is interesting. Like there's lots of ways to teach envisioning, or there's lots of ways to teach comprehension, but what pieces can I take out? Because either it wouldn't make sense, or the student's even doing them, or they're not there yet, right?
Right.
And so I'm kind
And
of
it can become overwhelming for a student to have too many things.
yes.
Well, think about it in general. I mean, we're fairly simple people as humans. And when we get too many things going on in our brain, we start to our wires start to go haywire, right? We're like, what do we say? What do we say? And I think and remember that as an educator, we may have an algorithm for the thought process of how we want to teach the content, but the kids, like you said, will develop their own piece, and they will teach us how they walk through the process themselves.
Mm-hmm. I really do. That's the exciting part. The more we model taking goals or skill sets and breaking them down into those step by steps, that's what kids can transfer. They can transfer,
Absolutely.
oh yeah, what do I see? What do I hear? Because we'll probably be in reading, we would be holding different text, right? I have my cat text, you have your dolphin text, but where we have in common is that algorithm, right? The step by step is how readers in general can enter into the envisioning goal skill
Mm-hmm.
set that readers use to ultimately comprehend a text. And the more and more they hear that, whether we're reading aloud and thinking it aloud, or whether we're modeling it really explicitly, or whether we're coaching it, in side by side or small group conversations, the more they hear that pattern, they'll internalize it and transfer it and make it their own. And here's the beauty of it. Here's we know we're really raising up truly independent students is when they apply it when it's needed. So a lot of times kids
Yes.
can perform strategies on demand, right? I did this whole series all week. We taught envisioning, lots of different strategies. Let's hear you envision. And so they can perform it on demand. But the beauty of becoming independent is when you watch students employing strategies when the text
Mm-hmm.
requires it, or when they know their thinking has broken down and they have their own repair kit. They know how to repair it. They know how to mend meaning on their own. And that's really, truly the beautiful part of teaching, because we see kids truly becoming independent in their decision making as well.
I agree. And I like what you said. That's when you, as an educator, the light bulb goes off in the student and you get those goosebumps where you see them actually not on command or on demand reciting back to you, but they're actually applying. So let's walk through this really quickly so that we can put it in clear algorithmic process. To think about debunking assessment and how we're wanting you to think about it is, first of all, we want to shift it from being more of an action item to more of a mindset. We want it to be a mindset thought about how we are working to really move our teaching forward and students learning, and really figuring out that rhythm between the teaching and learning between us as an educator and them as students. We also have mentioned that to become responsive, the way that it works and can work very simply and can be a quick win for you is watching and observing the way your students are intaking the content, how they're reacting to it. And then you as the educator thinking through, that didn't work so well, or that did work really well. And I know that as teachers, we do this, we do this, but to really think about it in particular with this new learning environment of the virtual interaction, how are our students consuming and listening and understanding the content that we are working through, our learning metrics? And then taking those patterns, observing, you can do some responsive on the fly, but really walking through that qualitative information and then transferring that into I don't want to say new understandings, but taking that and thinking about how do we use that information to guide our teaching the next day. Does that sound pretty good if I captured all your geniusness?
Yep. That sounds great. And I love the layer that you're putting on it because it is helping me think through, it's helping me think through the steps.
Yeah, we want it to be, this is the piece that I think that's so important for us as teachers. We like to have some quick wins. Like we want to see it happen. And we also know that these quick wins, if we do them a little bit at a time, it will turn into a new pedagogy of how we're teaching, right? We know, and here's the piece. Right now is such a great time for us to explore how we want to really teach because we're in an uncertain time. We have forgiveness in the way in which we're interacting. And so let's use it. Let's grow. Let's figure out, did that work? Did that not work? I mean, let's just fail forward together. And I know for myself, when I'm working with students, I'm like, all right, people, here's what we're going to work on today. And if it happens, it happens, you know? I mean, and I know I have my thought process and I know what I want to accomplish, but it may or may not occur just based on the environment that we're in. But big piece here is to think about how we think about assessment. And assessment does not have to be that end game of that quantitative regurgitation. It's about finding the patterns, assessing them, and responding throughout our time with our students.
I love it. Yeah, it's incredible.
So, well, I mean, I think that it's helped change my mindset. I mean, already just when you said to think about it as thought instead of action, that already switches the flip in my brain.
It really does. And it seems, and so it perhaps it's confirming, right, for part of our practice. Perhaps it's provoking and agitating, right, part of our pedagogy and practice. But I couldn't agree more with you, Sharon, that this is the idea to fail forward. I love that. Mm-hmm. And the idea of that's a part of learning and growing. And hopefully it brings in, it invigorates our teaching in ways that we look forward to trying out new thinking. And I really do think what we all got into teaching for is because we value and honor raising up students to be the best version of themselves. And I think in return, we become the best version of ourselves. And so that idea of I think this approach really, there's lots of things to bring into our pedagogy, but this approach really keeps students at the center of our teaching, and it honors their uniqueness and it honors their brilliance so that they feel known. And I think that's a really important part of connecting and building community and just raising up students who enjoy the love of learning and the process of learning.
I couldn't agree more. And with that, we want to thank you so much for joining us, because we know that at the heart of our hearts, our passion is with the students. Our passion is with growing and changing and creating a learning environment that allows growth and excitement for learning. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode for Read, Write, Think, and Code with Sharon and Renee. And we hope you will take this concept, this action item. Think about assessment as a thought and not as an action. And we'll see you next time.